The Christian right, in its various iterations, has long placed great emphasis on family values. Groups like Focus on the Family try to portray themselves as defenders of the God-ordained institution of the family, which they claim is under assault. I found myself thinking about family values last Sunday when I was in Louisville, Kentucky on vacation. While I was there, like many of you, I attended a No Kings protest. Now, I'm not sure what experience the roughly 40 folks from our congregation who donned yellow shirts to reading Side with Love had, but where I was, there were a small number of counter-protesters. They lined up along the parade route, standing on the sidewalk or between parked cars. They were not particularly threatening. They were not openly carrying arms. They were not dressed up in battle rattle. They were, however, very angry. One group made a particular impression. Well-dressed, wearing crosses, they screamed obscenities, flipped us the bird, and shouted, "We won," over and over again. Now, I invite you to imagine what this group of counter-protesters looked like. If you pictured them as teenagers, college students, or even middle-aged adults, you would be wrong. They were well-dressed, they appeared affluent, and they were about the same age as my parents. Looking at them and their Christian regalia as they made rude gestures, I thought, these are probably somebody's grandparents. What would their grandchildren think of them right now? I have, of course, no idea. They might not have children. Alternatively, their anger could be rooted in some kind of feeling that the next generation of their family has abandoned them. I've heard plenty of stories from members of our congregation and other Unitarian Universalist communities I've served that involve ruptures between queer youth and intolerant elders. In such narratives, which I know are painfully familiar to some of you, the older generation are too stuck in their theological or cultural views to expand their understanding of family values to include relatives who are different from them. The love one generation offers another is not unconditional, it is conditional. Be like me, act heterosexual, or fit within a gender binary or whatever, or I will withdraw my love, the interaction goes. The source of rage that I witnessed last weekend could well have been rooted in that kind of family dynamic. Might have also come from somewhere else, I don't really know. All I know is that a handful of people of the general type who claim religious righteousness, people old enough to have grandchildren, were apoplectic with anger as they watched a couple of hundred people march and proclaim "No Kings." And I wondered, as I watched them, about the values they were passing down to the next generation. What kind of values do they lift up in their church? Whatever I might think of the religious right in general, they do have a point when it comes to family values, because families and religious communities have long been two of the primary loci from which understandings of human dignity, meaning, and purpose spring. It's long been true that people join a Unitarian Universalist congregation precisely because of this dynamic. Think for a moment about what brought you here. When I ask you why, your answers usually fall within two categories. Some of you will tell me that you came seeking other people who share your core values. And others will say that you're with us because you're seeking a place that will support you in raising your children with those values. Now, my parents fall into that second category. They're an interfaith couple. My dad came from a Jewish household and my mother from a Protestant one. And they joined a Unitarian Universalist congregation seeking a place where they could bring my brother and me alongside others who shared in their principles. I'm about to embarrass my dad slightly, so... During the political rights family values crusades of the 1990s, my dad would sometimes implicitly invoke those principles when he objected to those who inherently cast family values as inherently reactionary. I remember him saying on more than one occasion, we have family values, we have liberal family values. In Donald Trump's America and Greg Abbott's Texas in 2025, I feel like the statement needs a slight recasting. The Christian right has succeeded in getting their religious values inscribed into the nation's laws, and in the state's laws. Today, I think we have to understand ourselves less as liberals and more as religious dissenters. One of the key values that we have to carry forward is the right to disagree with the state. For religious dissent, I have shared in the past, can be best defined as an objection to the merger of the church and the state. It rests upon a belief that religious community must be freely chosen. No group, no tradition has the exclusive claim to truth, the logic goes, and so no religious group should, through the mechanism of the state, be allowed to impose their values upon the rest of us. The family values that we religious dissenters promote in our communities do not fit into rigid categories. Groups like Focus on the Family might proclaim God created humans in his image, intentionally and immutably male and female. But we take a different position. Instead of asserting definitive creedal truths on the nature of the divine or humanity, we encourage people to seek truth that comes from their experiences and resides in their hearts. The British Unitarian Elizabeth Birtles names some of the values she found in her dissenting religious community as a child: questioning, imagination, reverence for life, a non-dogmatic approach, an appreciation of poetic and prophetic language, delight in the natural world, self-discipline, and a strong sense of personal responsibility were encouraged in me as a young person, she writes. Now, I've teased my parents that despite their claim in having family values, they never really explicitly stated them in the same way that someone like Jerry Falwell did. Instead, they left my brother and I to figure out those values implicitly. In an essay, I once half-teased them that as far as I could tell, those values boiled down to love your family, treasure your friends, bring more beauty into the world, and fight fascism. I invite you to reflect on the question, what kind of family values, what kind of values do you think we should be passing along to the next generation during a time when we are experiencing the union of a reactionary religion with an increasingly reactionary state? How might you summarize your understanding of dissenting family values? When I consider the question, I find the theologian Emily Dumler-Winkler to be helpful. You might turn to someone else. But I like her because Dumler-Winkler encourages me to imagine the purpose of dissenting religious communities during times of rising reaction. She has studied Unitarianism during the closing years of the 18th century in Britain. It was a time, like now, when the state could not be trusted to affirm human rights. Slavery was legal. Women were effectively property of their male relatives. Freedom of thought was largely outlawed. Looking to iconic Unitarians from that period, like the path-breaking feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, Dumler-Winkler came to an interesting conclusion about how our religious forebears sought to uplift human rights. They held justice to be a common good. It was not something fashioned by the state. Against those like contemporary Unitarian Universalist theologian William Scholes, who maintain a faith in legislating morality, they came to the conclusion that justice is something that community members could create amongst themselves. If slavery was legal outside of the bounds of their churches, then they could proclaim abolition and assist those escaping to freedom. If women were not viewed as equal under the law, then they could try to uphold gender equality in their congregations. If freedom of thought was forbidden by the state-sponsored religion, then they could celebrate it in their pulpits and in their fellowship halls. Today in Texas, we continue to hold justice as a common good, as something we create and share amongst ourselves. We do this in an environment where many are opposed to the kind of family values we proclaim. In this house, we say, you are free to be who you are and love who you love, so long as you are devoted to bringing more beauty, which is to say, more justice into the world. This is one reason why we fly the rainbow flag over our building. We want people to know that whatever their gender, whatever their sexual orientation, they are welcome here. I always feel good when folks from the LGBT community share that they feel comfortable at First Unitarian Universalist. On more than one occasion, someone has told me that our congregation is one of the few places in their lives where their gender is affirmed rather than questioned. Offering such affirmations, encouraging people to be themselves, is one of our core values. Such values run against those who are legislating morality in Texas today. I need not articulate all of the anti-LGBTQ legislation that the state legislature has considered since I moved to this state. Our values, though, are also sometimes in conflict with others in the Houston community. You might have noticed that we had to move our rainbow flag up from the breezeway to the third floor this week. We did so because someone has been repeatedly ripping down and destroying the flag on a regular basis. But rather than let this person censor us, we wanted to make sure that we can continue to proudly proclaim that love is love. Love is love. Again, I invite you to consider how you might name your family values. When I say family values, I'm not necessarily just speaking the values of your birth family or your blood relations. If you prefer, you can reframe the idea to address the values of your family of choice. That is, of course, what congregations like ours become for a lot of people, families of choice. Over the years, I've seen our members and friends go to extraordinary lengths to take care of each other. Parents living far from or estranged from their own parents have found adoptive grandparents for their children here. Elders living on their own have discovered community members willing to provide them far more support, driving them to appointments, helping them to navigate the Byzantine corporate healthcare system, or making them meals than many children can do. Kids meet other kids in our religious exploration program to whom they become as close as cousins. I'm still good friends with a number of people that I met as a youth at church. We Unitarian Universalists view character formation to be one of the primary purposes of our religious community. There's an old saying that we believe in salvation by character. This is the challenging proposition that the good that we are is reflected in the good that we do. It's also the necessary claim that being part of our congregation should make us better people. Here I think of the importance of friendship. Our friends help us to live into our values by encouraging us to act. This can take place on the scale of politics, attending a march like the No Kings rally, taking each other to the polls, as we are throughout this month, speaking at City Hall, or the like. But it most often occurs on the interpersonal level because friendship is an action. It includes actions like all of the ones I named earlier that are found in families of choice. It also contains simple things like sharing a conversation, a meal, or just being together. Often, friendship is rooted in a shared celebration of beauty. Some of the strongest bonds that I have formed have come through a mutual appreciation for an art or a style of music. There's something that happens when we come together and say, this aesthetic speaks to my soul, and ask, does it speak to yours also? Echoing deep to deep, sometimes finding that yes inscribed in the heart of our interlocutor can be a powerful bond. What happens, when that happens, the theologians Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock observe, we often find ourselves opening to the world as sacred space, loving life fiercely, and in the name of love, protecting the goodness of Earth's intricate web of life. In times like these, when it seems like so much ugliness is in the world, uplifting beauty can be a balm. But it can be more than that, embracing our planet as a paradise, dissenting from the view that heaven is somewhere else rather than here. We find that we are responsive to and responsible for the ground upon which we live. We enter fully, heart, mind, soul, and strength, they write, into savoring and saving paradise. Waking up to the world as it is, infused with ugliness, yes, but replete with beauty, we are called, in the words of James Baldwin, to ask, what will happen to all of that beauty? Dissenting family values require us to nurture that beauty as best we can and as best we understand it. This brings me to the last point of my summary of my own family values of love your family, treasure your friends, bring more beauty into the world, and fight fascism. The words are better put in the words of Charles Sumner, the great abolitionist, Unitarian, and probably the best senator in the history of the United States. Sumner enjoyed the arts, the magnificent soaring of the human spirit uncovered in poetry, prose, and painting. He said, beauty is in art, in literature, in science, and in every triumph of intelligence, all of which I covet for my country. This fed his spirit and gave him strength. But what he wanted more for the world than the art, literature, and science that he so enjoyed was what he called higher beauty. This he named as relieving the poor, elevating the downtrodden, and being a succor to the oppressed. Of it, he said, there is true grandeur in an example of justice, making the rights of all the same as our own, and beating down prejudice like Satan under our feet. This understanding of beauty in Sumner's day led him to oppose slavery with every fiber of his being. In our day, it means opposing fascism, authoritarianism, fighting against all that would crush the human spirit into dust and preventing us from proclaiming the birth of a more beautiful world. Dissenting family values. I've done my best to name the values that I would pass along to the next generation: loving family, treasuring friends, doing what I can to bring more beauty into the world, and struggling against all that would prevent everyone from thriving. How would you name your family values? I close with an exercise that might help you describe them. Give yourself the space to be a little bit comfortable. Close your eyes and imagine a young person you care about. Imagine what they will be doing 30 years into the future. What does this young person's life look like? Now, take another imaginative leap and envision yourself at this young person's 90th birthday party. Imagine that they are in a room surrounded by family and friends. It's a joyous occasion, and in the distance, as part of the room, there is a window from which you can see out the outside world. What does this world look like outside of the window? What does the world look like for this young person as they are about to turn 90? What do you see through the glass? Now, imagine that this young person, who is now 90 years old, a grandparent, a great-grandparent, is getting up to give a toast. They're planning on saying something about all of the gratitude that they have for the gathering. But instead, they look up at the wall and see a picture of an illustrious ancestor. You. What do they say about you? What do they say about the family values, values from their family of birth or family of choice that you have passed down to them? After the service or in Channing Hall at home with a friend, I invite you to share something of that vision and state something of your family values. But in the meantime, in the spirit of the shared values articulated in our covenant and held by this congregation, I invite you to all say Amen.